Hello, everyone. My name is Thuy Tran, and I'm the Festival and Exhibitions Director of CAAMFest. We have such a special treat for you. We're here with Maria Ressa, co-founder and CEO of Rappler and Nobel Peace Prize-winning journalist. Maria couldn't make it to our festival, but we're so grateful that she was able to make time to do this virtual Q&A with us. I know you're such a busy person, but Maria, it's so good to see you again. The last time we met was at Sundance at the world premiere of And So It Begins, and I'm so happy that we were able to screen it at CAAMFest as our closing night presentation. So I'm just going to dive into it. I know we have such few precious moments with you, but I know you've worked with Ramona Diaz before, formerly on 1,000 Cuts, which centered around you and your fight against former Filipino President Rodrigo Duterte and protecting freedom of the press. I'm just wondering, can you share with us why was it so important for you to be a part of this documentary? And So It Begins. And what was it like to work with these powerful women, with Ramona and Leni?
I keep telling Ramona we didn't need to be in it. So, I mean, look, I think it's the transition period, right? Like, I actually always say, everyone asks, so what is it like under President Marcos? This is the second time we've had a Marcos in the Philippines. And in 1986, his father was ousted in a people power revolt, accused of stealing 10 billion, at least 10 billion US dollars, right? By $86. So we're really back to the future. And I always say, look, we were in hell. I think that's what you see in 1,000 Cuts, how we survive hell. And now we're in purgatory, right? So we're getting better. This worked really well. I was just at the Vatican, and when I was talking about hell and purgatory, it seemed right for the place. Look, I think, did we see it coming? Yes. The all of the statistical surveys showed it. And I think we lived through, before anyone else around the world, watching the splintering of realities, watching history change in front of our eyes. That's a little bit of what you see in the film. But also beyond that, that Milan Kundera quote, the struggle of man is the struggle of power, the struggle of power. Wait, what's that quote? The
I
struggle of, oh my God, the Milan Kundera quote is,
I
the
think it was
struggle for
the
power is the
struggle.
struggle of man, no, memory against forgetting. Which one was it?
It's something like it's. I know you had said it too at one of the. I
Got
have
it,
the
got it.
quote. I have the quote. It's Okay, we're going to take a moment here to find this really important. Oh, the struggle of
I
man
got
against power is the
it.
struggle against memory and forgetting.
No, the struggle of
Oh,
man
okay.
against
No.
power. The struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. Right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
if you can change, you can literally change the past by changing memory. And there's so many films that actually show this, right? If you remember Inception, the way you change reality was you went into the dream world to change reality. Well, now you go into social media, and with information operations, which is what we saw with Marcos Jr., the name Marcos went from being a kleptocrat, ousted in people power, to the greatest leader the Philippines has ever known. And in fact, since May 4th just ended, one of the first videos I remember of Marcos Jr. was him as a Jedi Knight. May the fourth be with you, him wielding a lightsaber. I mean, imagine, right? And then, that makes more sense also against, say, what happened in the Indonesian elections, where artificial generative AI was used by the son-in-law of former President Suharto. His name is Prabowo, a general who was accused of human rights violations, who used Midjourney to create photos, videos, cartoons of himself being a cuddly bear kind of
Mhm.
person. That changed the vote, right? So I guess, sorry, what a long answer to your question. I think what you see in And So It Begins is this transition to, it's like a sick, we already caught the virus. It's the virus of lies.
Mhm.
And then you see how it literally changes reality. And It isn't really as much what you do now as much as what people believe.
Absolutely. And what you were saying, we're back to the future. I'm seeing this phenomenon that's happening in the Philippines. And it's also, and it's not just common to the Philippines. I see it in America time and time again, where society just has this collective cultural amnesia of what has happened, of people forgetting history. And I think you were saying that part of this is because of how we're crafting narratives these days, how we're crafting social media. I mean, in the documentary, we see that Bongbong Marcos, he's flagrantly avoiding real journalism. He recruits vloggers and social media influencers. He's not answering any real questions, and it's a terrifying propaganda campaign, to be honest. So can you speak a little bit more on the rise of social media and digital media and its impact on that campaign and possibly journalism as a whole?
Yeah, I don't know where to begin except to say that there's a chance that fact-based, evidence-based reality is going away. And in terms of the business of news, that could happen in digital news within a year to 2 years. It's an existential moment. Um, Social media is by design. It spreads lies at least 6 times faster than really boring facts. And that's an MIT study from 2018. And if you factor in that Elon Musk then bought Twitter, turned it into X, fired all their trust and safety people, and it's far more toxic today. There are several studies that have already been done. So lies will spread faster. What we saw in the Philippines in 2017 is that if you lace lies with fear, anger, and hate, then it spreads even faster. That's the virality. But beyond that, when you seed a meta narrative, like Marcos is the greatest leader that the Philippines has ever had, it doesn't stay underground. When you seed it, every time the information operations pulls it up, it
Mhm.
gains greater spread, right? So it's the cognitive bias. You're literally, it's like Pavlov's dogs. You're training the you're training segments of society, and the design of social media allows this segmentation, or another word would be ghettoizing, right?
Mm.
Like people don't see what other people see, so it's rife for manipulation. But what makes it even harder today is that not only our trust and safety teams have been fired, we've gone to new basement lows in terms of safety for people online, but you've added generative AI. ChatGPT was introduced in November 2022. And just last night, Google announced a new generative AI that it's adding to search.
Mm.
So, what that does literally is you don't know, it separates reality and creates more fiction and fuses them together, right? Because large language models, or the second, this kind of generative AI, is never has never been anchored on facts. It's anchored on probability.
Mm.
So if you remember, there was like a professor who sued OpenAI because he was accused in his biography, it included something about sexual harassment. I kept thinking, wow, if that showed it, were there lots of probabilities of professors and sexual harassment, right? Like, so it's fascinating the stuff that it does, but it isn't a mathematical equation. This is real life. It's
Mhm.
reality. It is changing the way people behave. And because it changes how we feel, it changes the way we behave, it changes the way we vote.
Absolutely. And I'm also, I also noticed that, I feel like the conversation that you and I are having, not everyone is having this. And, in the Philippines, I see like such a clear class divide too. Like nowadays, it seems like everyone has access to social media, to a phone, but not everyone has access to maybe the information that you're sharing, or what they may not have access to be able to discern what is fact and fiction. And and maybe part of it is also due to access to education. And so how are you maybe Rappler, or other media orgs in the Philippines, like how are you all like making sure that that facts and true information is getting to these folks who yeah.
No, I mean, it's a fantastic question, and actually the biggest challenge we've had. So, in the last 2 years, I've realized that the global trends are on the side of big tech, and they are not on the side of facts. So, social media was never anchored on facts, because facts are boring, and it isn't, it created an outrage economy, right? And that has repercussions globally, because online violence is real world violence. The fact that we have a violent, far more violent world today is connected to the toxic sludge we are literally pumping into our systems. That's social media. But then when you add the fact that now you're not going to be able to connect different, because a democracy depends on being able to listen and find compromise. That isn't the way our information ecosystem works. So we're one step further away from that. And you were seeing this play out in the United States, right? It's a whole
Mhm.
brave new world, I would say. So our challenge was, how does the business of news survive in this environment? And 2 years ago, I thought, given the trends, 2 years ago in January 2023 was when Meta, Facebook, the world's largest distributor of news, decided that it would choke traffic to news sites. It just basically said, we don't want news. So on your Meta feed or on Instagram, anything that they own, you will not get news links, which means you will get the propaganda, you will get information operations, but you will not get the facts. That's one. And that meant for every news site around the world that starting January last year, traffic dropped 50% to 90%.
Oh.
And then just this year with search generative experience, which is what Google rolled out last night. Well, Google rolled out Gemini on search. What it does is we're all preparing for a drop in search traffic to news sites of between 30 to 40% minimum. Right. So that means, what does that mean? That means the business of news, digital news in particular, will be extremely challenged. And you, as a consumer of news, are going to have to go directly to the news websites. It's a very fragmented reality right now. And so I worry about elections, because people are going to be pummeled by information operations, especially Americans,
Mhm.
but they will not get the news brought to them.
Right.
That's that's frightening for me.
Yeah, and thank you so much for bringing up about America. I'm not saying that we need to censure America at all, but of course, as America is moving into our presidential elections this year, what are the parallels and correlations that you see existing between, the Philippines campaign that we just experienced and, this incoming election in America? What should Americans be looking out for and thinking about?
It started in 2016. uh, Information operations, and this would be foreign information operations, began to target the fracture lines of society. You mentioned this. In the Philippines, our fracture lines were largely economics, the rich versus the poor. It was part of the reason Duterte got elected in 2016. In 2016, 126 million Americans were touched by Russian information warfare, right? Like, and this is data that was given to the Senate Intelligence Committee that they released publicly. And that's the IRA and the GRU, the intelligence agency of Russia. And what they did is they targeted Black Lives Matter, they targeted fracture lines. That's 2016. In 2020, in the elections in 2020, social media, Facebook, Twitter, ramped up all of their safeguards, right? But it wasn't enough, because on January 6th, you had violence on Capitol Hill. And
Mm.
that's really when we saw Silicon Valley sins come home to roost. And America is still sorting out justice for this, right? And the kinds of claims of election fraud we've now seen in many different countries around the world. It wasn't just in the United States. You saw this play out in Brazil,
Mhm.
in Bolsonaro versus Lula, right? And they had their January 8th, right? So what's going to happen in 2024 when news has been choked by Meta? The safeguards have been thrown out. You have Silicon Valley investors Mark Andreessen coming out with an 11,000 word manifesto that says that ethics is evil, that trust and safety is evil, that the tech will do it. So what does that mean? That means Americans should be warned. It's not even a warning. You're seeing this play out already. We've seen January 6th, but what's happening in American campuses today? The flashpoint is Gaza. The fracture line is Palestine, Jewish and Palestine, Israel and Palestine, and that has a long 100-year history, right? And in America, I mean, if you're not American living in America, you don't quite understand why the fear is there in the campuses, as well as the call for an end to the violence, which frankly, this is testing the rule of law globally. Does it still work? Sorry, I know that I'm dumping so much in there, but
I'm absorbing all of it.
These are all can be and are being manipulated moving into elections in the United States. And they're connected to information operations that AI, both the first time it was used, which is in social media, and generative AI, neither of which are anchored in reality. So, as people go to the polls, as Americans go to the polls, get off these devices.
Mhm.
Organize your family and your friends, move into a fact-based, evidence-based world. And if you feel emotional, i.e., full of fear, anger, and hatred, stop and pause. Let your thinking slow, rational mind stop and help you make a rational choice.
Thank you so much. I was going to I was going to ask you, what should we do to combat, these fracturing in the digital sphere? And what you said is so true. Like I think we're just so absorbed in our phones and, our screens that we don't take time to step back and really assess, what is going on around us in the world, like grounded in society. And we're just, like part of this festival is really trying to get people to come together in person, to be together, to build these connections, to get to know each other. And so I think, what you're saying is just so important. I see spaces like CAAMFest and other, um, sorry, like other festivals or other events, other community gatherings as being, really integral to maintaining and upholding the integrity of our society and how we relate to each other.
I would add one other thing, right, which is to be aware, and you'll see this in the film. Leni Robredo was the opposition candidate, and we did a kind of a whole of society approach to protect the facts, right? To let the facts. It's an influencer marketing campaign for facts. Essentially, what we did with about 150 different groups, and before the elections, we were able to do that, but a woman is attacked again starting in 2017 at least 10 times more than men. And this is a trend that didn't only happen in the Philippines, it is happening all around the world. And you can see even in the EU, women journalists, activists, women politicians are specifically targeted with the goal of pushing them out, pounding them to silence, making them voluntarily give up. You can't, women hold up half the sky. So this is something also to know, that if you are marginalized in the real world, Asian Americans, if you're brown, LGBTQ, Black, you are further marginalized in the code that Silicon Valley has put out. And, now you don't just have the American companies, but you have the China, TikTok, which is, America is in the debate right now about whether it will ban it. Right? But all of these things, I think it goes hand in hand. If you're going to ban TikTok, ban everything else that is also manipulating. We should not be allowing insidious manipulation of our biology. It's like hacking our biology to change the way we vote.
Absolutely. And I think, what you were just sharing there, how, if you're marginalized in the real world, you're even more marginalized in the digital world. Something you shared also in one of your conversations at Sundance is how we're living in science fiction times, which totally resonates with me so much. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Who would have thought, right? Starting with a virus where we would have to isolate and wear masks. And then now we have this insidious manipulation where you have, again, I'll go back to Valley tech billionaires who have given up on the sustainable development goals. You have Chat GPT, you have these generative AI that is creating, and I'm going to do in quotes, the rabbit ear, companions
Mm.
that aren't real. Or in China, a startup that will allow you to talk to your dead relative, right? It's almost like, I guess, there are many things we want. Like, we want to eat as much sugar as we can because it tastes good, but do we really want to, right? Drugs. And that's the perfect segue, because disinformation, for example, Yuri Andropov was a former KGB chairman, former head of the Soviet Union. He compared disinformation to cocaine.
Mm.
Drugs, wow, cocaine can give you a great high. So this is what he said about disinformation. He said, disinformatia is like cocaine. You take it once or twice, you're okay. But if you take it all the time, you're a changed person. And that's what's happening to us, right? If you keep giving us what we want online, and you can see this in the US Surgeon General's report released May last year. If you stay on this, it's like empty calories. It's like being on drugs. It's mildly addictive. And for the younger generation, they begin to live a performative life in an outrage economy. This is not good for you. It's not good for our next generation. It isn't good for the development of society. And what we're seeing is the impact on our democracies, right? As of this year, this is VDEM in Sweden that came out with a study that said at least 71% of the world today is under autocratic rule. So a lot is at stake in the US elections. The rest of the world can't vote in that. But where the US goes, it will determine a tipping point. So we're seeing, June next month will be the EU elections. 2024 is a tipping point year. And so a lot is riding on you. If you're watching the film, if you're going to vote, go, organize, get your family and friends to think slow, get away from thinking fast.
Right. No pressure. I know we're running out of time, Maria, and this has been such an amazing conversation. I wanted to, just kind of take a step back, and maybe my last question for you is, I know that, you are doing so much, you're upholding so much, and I know it's not easy. And I'm one of those, I try not to put people on pedestals. So I just want to take a step back and just I want to ask you, like, what are you doing to take care of yourself, and how are you encouraging yourself to kind of push through, these challenging times? Like, what's your self-care practice there, and your process to kind of move through these hard moments?
I'm I'm the last of the baby boomers, and I grew up at a time when democracy seemed unstoppable. This is the year when democracy looks like it will die, when
Mm.
journalism looks like it will die. If this happens, there's no way we can fight climate change, which is literally the planet dying, right? So much is at stake this year for me. And I'm half joking when I say I don't plan to sleep until the end of 2024 so
Yeah.
that we can see it's like a sprint that's a marathon sprint. But we're seeing some good headway. I just over the weekend was with Pope Francis at the Vatican, where they pulled together 30 Nobel laureates, along with politicians, with different civil society groups, to try to come up with an agreement, something that we've released on peace, right? Like an end to nuclear armament, calling for an end to the impunity of big tech. There's a lot of stuff that's there, but primarily the first one is we need to stop the killings. We need to stop wars, whether that is in Ukraine, in Sudan, in Gaza, right? This is the test for an international rules-based order. Another way of saying that, I mean, in some ways, some of the global South people will say rules-based order is, again, getting around it. It's rule of law. Do we have rule of law, or are we going to let our friends get away with different things, right? Is it impunity? And I think that's and again, you can see how in Chile, where I was for World Press Freedom Day less than a week ago, or a week ago, something like, and then Brazil 2 days before that for G20, it was really about the number of journalists who have been jailed, who have been killed. It's 44% higher, the number killed, largely because of Gaza. Right? So this is the moment. And I think the students demonstrating in campuses, the different ways faculty in each of those campuses have dealt with it, show you we're moving into a new world. It isn't, I've seen people compare it to Vietnam War in the campuses. This is not like that, because students organize and are connecting on tech that didn't exist before. And you see institutions grappling with how to do this. I think it means we need to find new ways. We need to be more creative. We need to listen. Let the call for an end to violence lead the way.
Absolutely. And I think thank you, Maria, for lighting a fire under our ass. Like, we all need this, like, because it's such a sobering moment right now. And what you're reminding us through this conversation is that we all have the power to do something to combat this, but we all need to take action, and we all need to be conscious of our impact, and we all need to feel empowered to do this. Because if we just sit here, just continue playing our phones, then, the future that you're seeing right now is going to play out. But we still have a moment here in this year to stop some of these things from happening. Like, we need to go out and vote. Americans have the power to change how this election is going to go. And so, Maria, thank you so much for being here with us today, for sharing all this with us, and for, really encouraging us to see, all these multiverses that are existing right now that we're living in parallel with. So appreciate you so much for all the work that you're doing. I know it's really hard and so challenging, and yet you continue to be this light of inspiration for all of us to guide us. So I appreciate that so much.
No, you're very kind. But sorry, can I add one last thing
Sure,
here?
of course.
Stay away from cynicism. I
Yeah.
mean, you can see this in the way the film ends, right? Because one of the things we're seeing in the United States right now, and there'll be a report that will come out in the next few weeks, right, is a generational gap. And the kinds of information operations that leads to this generational gap. It has everything to do with trying to convince Americans that you shouldn't vote because the United States as a colonial power remains a colonial power. I've seen these meta narratives being seeded, and they're being seeded by IO, information operations. So be careful of cynicism. I think cynicism is our enemy. If you don't feel you have a voice, I mean, obviously we all do. It's how we're being targeted. But if you don't work for a better future, then it will get worse. So please go.
Absolutely. Fight for a future.
Sorry about that. I just remembered, right? Because these are the meta narratives that we're seeing, and it's a bit scary because I think Americans believe it.
It is, but again, just bring back, we have the power to change this, to change our future. So, Maria, thank you again so much. Have a great night. I know it's late over there. I hope you get some rest.
Speak soon. Bye-bye. Good luck.